Do you see this layout? This is the Levant mine underground layout. The tunnels you're seeing, one of the branches goes 1.5 kilometers under the Atlantic Ocean. Just imagine when a person goes inside one of these tunnels, there are millions of tons of water just sitting above them. The entrance of the Levant mine is on the beach, and it's because of this that this mine has a very famous name to it, the scariest mine in the world. So let's see why that is. There are plenty of dangerous jobs all over the world, but if you go back 1 century, almost every single job is dangerous. Even nowadays, mining is extremely dangerous. With all the modern equipment, all the safety gear, there is a high chance of fatality. But when you go back more than 100 years, mining is the most dangerous job in the world. When you look at the Levant mine, you imagine what type of machines were used to dig these tunnels. But you have to know that these tunnels were built as early as the year 1820, so everything was done by hand because there's no electricity, no equipment, just your hands, pickaxes, and shovels. There's not even lights because the only light source you have are candles. The reason the Levant mine began was because of copper, but once they started digging around, they realized that there is a lot of tin here. After finding tin and copper together, this became one of the most important mines in England, because when you mix tin and copper together, you get bronze, something that's very valuable at this time. In this era, mines all over the world are dangerous. It doesn't matter if you're in England or India or Africa. The Levant mine is even more dangerous because they're over digging everything. They're going down 600 meters into the ground. Just even saying that terrifies me, let alone a 200-year-old technology doing all this. They didn't only go down 600 meters, they went down and they expanded like a tree branch every direction. It's kind of like a tree root that goes everywhere. And of course, the most terrifying part is under the Atlantic Ocean. When you look at this map, do you realize that there's something wrong? Of course there is. The ones that are closer to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, if they decide to collapse, all that ocean water will go inside the mine shaft and pretty much drown anyone that's below this level. 90% of the employees, if they are working down here, will drown because all that seawater is going in there. The employees that worked in this mine, they were forced to take their clothes off because it was so damn hot. When you go underground, the heat of planet Earth is going up and it makes that environment hotter and hotter. And this makes it harder to breathe. The employees also didn't wear their boots inside because it was so damn hot that they would start sweating and a puddle would form inside the boot, giving them trench foot if they're working hours on end. When you get trench foot, there could be an infection, and that means they have to cut your foot off if it gets terrible. So to not risk that, they wouldn't even wear boots to work. The employees didn't have lights, so for them to see, they would take some clay from the ground, put a candle on their helmet, and stick it on their head. And they would have these special type of matches that were waterproof, and they could keep lighting it. It was extremely hard to breathe down there, and these candles were not making it any easier to breathe. The tunnels were expanding day by day, but it seems like the managers weren't impressed by the speed, because around this time the dynamite had been introduced, and this is when they entered the mine. Of course, the dynamite would make this job a whole lot easier in the amount of supplies they could get out. They would just dig a hole, put some holes in it, run some dynamite, and light it up and explode, and you collect all the goods. This would make it more dangerous, but a lot more profitable. The employees would work 7 days a week, and some would even work for 15 hours. When their workday was finished, they would have to wait in line and climb a ladder to go to the top. Climbing up and down the ladder would take 3 hours of their time in a day, so 1.5 hours down and 1.5 hours up. This was terrible because they wouldn't get paid to go up and down. They would clock in at the bottom of the mine shaft. Another terrible thing about the situation is that there were a lot of 15-year-old boys that would work in these mines. There was no other mines that was this deep in the world, and the manager realized that a lot of their time is spent going up and down. This is when a type of elevator was made for them to go up and down to save some time, and it worked like this. This shaved 3 hours down to only 1 hour, so that's at least something they did for the employees, but they truly did it for themselves to speed up the process. Usually there was more than 700 people working down there. Time passes and we get to October 20, 1919. Most of the employees in this mine served in World War I, and they were faced with horrible situations. And to make their lives better, they got a job in this mine, and some could argue that this mine was just as bad as a World War I trench. After coming back from the war, a lot of these soldiers that got a job said that this mine is extremely unsafe. But the people in charge didn't care. They said, keep working, we'll worry about that. But when we get to October 20th, 1919, the platforms that were installed decades ago finally gave out. And since they were on the top floor, they fell down, and level by level, they stacked on top of each other and collapsed down. And while it's collapsing, every single tunnel is being shut out. Since it was the end of the day, most of the people had gotten out, and there was 370 people down there. And they were all locked up with a lot of debris in the way. Some of these 370 men were killed because of the collapse, but most of them were stuck behind the debris. One of the employees is John Grenfell, and he hears a loud noise while he's leaving. He tells the people something must have happened, but nobody cares, so he decides to go down there and check for himself. He realized that yup, everything collapsed, and there's a giant well under him with some dead bodies that have been killed because of the fall. He immediately comes out and says the mine has collapsed, but they didn't truly know how. Luckily, a phone line had just been ran to the Levant mine, so they immediately called nearby mines, and they came with a lot of help, especially with some winches. These winches were extremely helpful in the rescue situation because there wasn't any other equipment or ladder you could use to go down there. They would lower the workers down there with equipment so they can get the debris. At first they lowered them to get the dead bodies that are on the top out. Then they started digging, something that takes a lot of time because one by one you have to fill buckets up and take it up. The people that were stuck under in the mine shaft weren't staying still. First of all, they had a water line available to them, so they weren't going to stay thirsty. Even though they didn't have food, at least they had fresh water. So they started digging from the other side. Even though there is no communication between the two, but the people on top know that they have a shortage of food, and if they don't hurry up, they will die of starvation. So day in and night out, they're working their ass off to get the debris off so they can save the people. It takes 72 hours of pure digging by hand, and finally, they reach each other. But unfortunately, not all of them were alive. Some of them died of starvation, and some of them died because of falling debris. The good thing was that this situation happened at the end of a workday. If this disaster would have happened a few hours before it, maybe hundreds of people would have been killed. But 31 people still died, and 5 of those 31 were World War I veterans. Soldiers that survived one of the most brutal wars in history. They got a job to get a better life, but they were killed only a year later in a mine disaster. But why is the story of this mine so important? This disaster caused the safety of mines to go up a notch. A lot of mines were forced to bring up their safety codes, so something like this doesn't ever happen again. I'm not saying every single mine did this, but it truly helped the world. But even with modern technology, mining is probably the most dangerous job.